Hi, everybody. We are going to get started here in just a minute or two. I want to make sure we get as many people in through the front door and in their seats as possible.
One fun
And
thing we like to do while everybody's trickling in, if you could in the chat or the Q&A, this will be a fun way of testing whether our settings work correctly. Just tell us where you're joining from. We always like to see the locations of people, and we'll see if Rob enabled the chat.
just got it. Just figured it out. Everyone should have access to chat and Q&A. So yeah, just give a shout out where you're connecting from. That'd be
Got Utah. It's also a good chance for us to get all our windows situated and such before we really get rolling. Cary, North Carolina, that's cool. I am joining from Michigan, Lansing, Michigan. Pleasanton, California. This is always very fun to see. Germany, Oregon. Is it Oregon or Oregon? We've
It's
got some experts on the
Oregon.
line here. Oregon. Okay. South Africa, Israel. This is very fun.
all right. If I did this right, I should be sharing my screen.
You got it.
Just yell at me if I'm off. So let's get started. So hello, officially, everyone. Welcome to our presentation today. With this webinar, we're kicking off a new series here at Blues built around this concept of beyond the prototype. The idea is really to help bridge this chasm that our customers experience. So these are individuals, they're companies who are quickly developing prototypes, but then kind of getting bogged down sort of down the line in maybe the piloting or scaling phases. So one way that we at Blues can help is to start facilitating these conversations with others who have been successful, right? Who have the scars to prove it, if you will. And today that is Hello Every Day. And you'll be hearing from them in just a minute here. First, some very quick logistics for you. If you have any questions during the presentation today, TJ just mentioned this, but you can ask them in the Q&A panel provided in the Zoom UI. You're welcome to use chat as well. We'll monitor both. TJ and I will be here to help kind of triage these questions and make sure they get answered by our panel. A question we always get asked, and I want to make sure you're all fully aware of this, is it being recorded? Yes, it is, and it'll be available on the Blues YouTube channel at this URL. While you're there, I always recommend subscribing because you'll get that little notification in YouTube that there is a new video to share. Now, today from Blues, you're going to get TJ and I. If we haven't met before, my name is Rob Lauer. I'm Director of Developer Relations here at Blues. TJ Van Tol is our Principal Developer Advocate. Thanks, TJ, but we are not the important ones here. But we'll get to them in a second. But I wanted to kick things off kind of with this off-quoted line from a Cisco press release from 7, 8 years ago, but it's still relevant today. Prototypes are cheap. Production-ready IoT is expensive. I don't think any of us can deny this reality. From my perspective, what I've seen, sort of my interpretation of expensive is time, right? It takes a lot of time to get an IoT product off the ground and done right. Why is that? Well, devil's always in the details. Part of the problem that I see is the people I work with mostly are approaching this from a strictly technical perspective, which I'm a little sad to say now is kind of become the easy part, right? So wiring up some sensors, writing firmware, it's a heck of a lot easier to me at least than building out this cross-functional operating model across hardware, manufacturing, fleet management. What else is in here? Security, sales, support, governance, all that. It's intimidating to say the least. And here at Blues, we are always looking to help. And this is the one Blues related plug I'm going to make today. But we have developed what we call a connected product guidebook. This is a thorough set of resources meant to help smooth this path from planning a project through to building, validating, testing, scaling. The guidebook itself is made up of 12 articles, covers nearly every aspect of building a connected product. Part of the guidebook is a really engaging product development roadmap tool, provides a Gantt chart visualization here of potential steps involved when you're moving through this process. You can find all of this at this URL. There's no gated signups or anything like that. It's really freely available. Just check it out, take from it what you need, ignore the rest. Let us know what's useful, what we can improve. And with that, I've got a reminder here. I've got a quick poll for you all, and then we can transition to our friends here at Hello Every Day. So I'm going to stop sharing and launch our first poll, and you can answer that as you're able. And to that, I'd like to hand things over to Kabir.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, TJ. I just realized that hosts cannot participate in the poll, so I can't do that. All right. Well, thanks for joining, everybody. My name is Kabir Bhatia. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hello Everyday. I'm joined with two of my co-founders, Mark Levitt, Mark, and Huang Dong. Mark is the inventor of this technology. He's both an electrical engineer and a physician by training and had been an inventor most of his life. He had already developed the prototype before the company was formed. Huang and I joined him because we'd been thinking about this space, and we bring different disciplines. Huang is a PhD in chemistry and had a background in Intel. She runs everything that makes us a company as it relates to supply chain, as it relates to our technology, to transact, etc. And then I'm sort of head of sales at this moment. So what I thought we'd do is walk through really quickly in the next 10 minutes what Hello Everyday does and sort of a little brief insight into our journey. And then we'd have a conversation around it. So you have some context about what we do and how we got here. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get going. And I've got Huang making sure that she is going to answer questions if there are any in the chat related to who we are. So if you guys are curious, ask away. All right, you guys see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Excellent. We went through this already. We are a small but mighty team. And this is a really interesting component of who we are and what we do. One of the things that we really wanted to make sure was that we could operate this company with a really small footprint. And that has kept our cost low, but it also has allowed us to have a much greater impact than what we should be able to do. It's also made us much more agile and nimble in a way that allows us to operate in this highly fluid environment that isn't always funding friendly. And it's allowed us to get much further than we should. Our vision is that where we want to see communities where individuals can age in place. We are an age tech company, but our thesis has been around, can we help people age in place with their autonomy, dignity, and safety intact? And so our mission has been to create products that connect and delight individuals that are aging in place. This is what our product lineup looks like. And if you'd asked me a year ago that we would have three products, I would have said that just seems silly. But here we are. We have three products in our lineup. We started with a Hello Everyday sensor on the left. This is a human presence sensor that detects human presence and it conveys that information to up to five people via text. Based on customer feedback and requests, we added a call button so they can press and notify that they are in distress and want somebody to help. And our latest product on the right is specifically focused on people with cognitive impairment. It's a device that both enriches, but also maintains their safety using music and structure. And again, it was based on customer requests as our sensors started to get deployed with people with cognitive impairment. All of our sensors have Blues cellular modems in it. This is what the basic DNA of our sensor is. It includes that human presence sensor. It has a temperature sensor in as well. So if because of climate change, if the older adult is in an unsafe environment, it alerts their people. We talked about the call button. We have our cellular modems cover US and Canada because that's what our software currently allows us to do. But the basic thesis has always been, can we create self-contained devices that all they need to do is plug it into a regular outlet? And we'll talk about sort of some of the trade-offs that we used in the past, but one of the key things that we were very keen on was to make sure that we're preserving that dignity and privacy. So the lack of cameras, microphones, passwords, or wearables was very important. This is what our Hello Tune sensor is. It's having a really big impact for people with cognitive impairment and their caregivers. Music is a really important tool that allows people to build new neural pathways, especially those that have cognitive impairment. And the form factor of something that is very easy and intuitive creates that autonomy for a person, even if they have cognitive impairment. It's specifically focused on for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to operate a remote or their TV effectively. Our customers have been really the core of how we've developed these products. Mark worked with a group of people when he was a volunteer for an organization here in Lake Oswego, and developed this product in conjunction with older adults. But our customers have tell us all the time about the impact that it has to both keep them connected and create that virtual village around them. Um, and it also allows that older adult to feel a sense of safety and knowing that if something was to happen to them, or if they were incapacitated for some reason, that somebody would know. And so both of those emotions are really strong in the products that we build. How does it work? It provides notifications via text, and these are some of the notifications. So on the left-hand side, we have about a third of our customers that choose to only use it as a safety device, and it would only send an alert if there was something wrong, all the way to providing reassurance with a lot of data that effectively makes this more camera equivalent without requiring any of the downsides of privacy concerns, etc. And so this has been a really interesting journey to see how our customers are deploying our sensors. We have about 250 sensors out in the market. This is what our footprint looks like thanks to NoteHub. We can see where they are, and they're all the way up in Homer, Alaska, which is way up there, but up and down the coast. And we've obviously spent time making sure that they work here in the Portland area so we can support them. We only started shipping them outside of Portland in September of last year. And so we're starting to build that footprint out as our customers take us there. This was a slide that we pulled together as we were thinking about this presentation, and I'll let Mark cover this in detail, but these were some of the unlocks that we had to go through as we were developing product. And it was, should we have Wi-Fi or only cellular? Can we do over-the-air updates? We use 3D printing, for example, as an unlock, and we continue to use it very effectively. The original PCBs were hand soldered by Mark, and Mark's actually holding the first one that was actually commercially made in that photograph. And so we can talk about this ad nauseum, but I wanted to tee this up, and then we'll have a conversation around this, because I know every journey from prototype to production is different. Rob, you think that's a good spot to stop?
That was fantastic. I was struggling to get to my mute button there. Um, I have a lot of questions here I could ask, and maybe I'll just start with this because when you're going through your slides, like and showing off the products, when I see those three products, the first thing I think about is simplicity, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that was part of your vision from day one, or is that something that kind of emerged through the early stages of product development?
Did I take that?
Yeah, Mark, go for it.
Yeah, so in coming up with it, basically I was volunteering to do tech support for older adults in our community. And so this consists of going to their house and they can't figure out their smartphone or something like that. And it's very clear when you help older adults try to use technology that it hasn't been designed for them, it's too complicated. I mean, touch screens don't even work for many older adults, whether their skin's too dry or they're shaking. And laptops are way more complicated than they can deal with. So from the very start, it was a less is more philosophy, no touch screen, no switches, no controls. It's basically you plug it in and it works, and it has one user interface, a light. If it lights up green, everything is good. If it lights up red, something's not working. Contact tech support, although we'll know besides. That was it. So yes, simplicity was a driver. And you'll see in the Hello Tunes, that vintage radio, it's a little more complicated. Still just two knobs, which, by the way, we custom print to make them bigger and finger friendly because you can't even buy old-fashioned knobs anymore. They're tiny little knobs and you've got to have grip strength. So simplicity, big driver. Inside, it's not so simple, but the outside and what the user sees is simple.
So I guess
Yeah,
related to that, when you got into, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but at what point did you start sort of consuming customer feedback and helping shape the product? Or again, did you have a really concise vision before you started and you didn't necessarily need as much feedback?
Customer involvement before the product was conceived. I was volunteering in this organization, this virtual village of seniors, and I had the idea we need to solve this problem. One of our members had had a medical emergency and nobody knew for 3 days. They passed away and everyone was up in arms. And I said, maybe we can solve this with technology. And do you want to be on a committee with me? And so I had half a dozen, basically everyone 70, 80 years old. And we whiteboarded it and came up with ideas, what they wanted, what they didn't want, cameras and stuff like that. And as I prototyped it, they saw every stage of it. So it wasn't feedback after it was built. It was customer, it's not feedback, it's immersion. By the way, I'm in the target demographic. Okay, that's kind of important. I'm 76, so I'm right in the middle of this demographic. So we were immersed in the customer needs from the very start.
Rob, I think I want to add a couple other pieces as well. I've had some experience with a startup where we were so focused on the invention that by the time we brought the invention to starting to get customer involvement, the market had moved on. And so when we co-founded Hello Every Day, Mark had just done such a masterful job of conceiving a product that was already effectively ready to deploy. We made one of the core theses of our company to be customer focused in a way that really leads us to where the customer wants us to go. But that's also meant that we've had to make some decisions that were counterintuitive, right? And it starts to bleed together in some of the questions that you're asking. In order to make the product super simple, we have to endure a fairly significant burden of complexity on the back end, right? So the fact that it only has one LED and there's no app means that it has to be supported in a way that doesn't require the customer to be able to do anything. We have to be able to do that remotely, but that has ensured that we could keep a really small footprint. And so there are trade-offs to all of these decisions, but we've been very conscious about how do we make those so that our customers, the end user, which is often an older adult, but also their people, which are often people in their 40s and 50s. How do we make sure that both of those stakeholders get what they're looking for from our product?
So I'm sorry, I have yet another follow-up here because this is interesting. So you mentioned like avoiding the app route. And what I see when I look at your product is there's kind of 3 points. You've got Hello Every Day, you've got the end consumer, but then you've got this supporting person,
Yeah.
which I see as like the consumer of an app interface. Like, how did you decide to sort of eliminate that, or I'm just curious about the
Well,
process there.
we foolishly thought initially that we could support this product on Wi-Fi and have an app. And we very quickly realized Wi-Fi was just a nightmare of an option because we installed a sensor like 80 miles away, and like within a week they changed their modem, and we were like, the sensor's offline. They didn't even think about the fact that it was going to throw off our sensor. It wouldn't work. We're like, no, we just can't have Wi-Fi. In fact, most communities, think about it, independent living, assisted living, their Wi-Fi is notoriously awful. And if you need like reliable uptime, it has to have its own channel. And so cellular was really important. The app proved to be just really challenging and created a lot of friction for people. So we would get the first person to install it relatively easily, but if we were relying on them to install it for others, that became a huge friction point. And so Mark was clever in thinking about how to take that friction away, and only rely on text interface. And that's proven to be much more reliable. So we check when we ask for phone numbers and first names and last names, and we check that we got this right phone number, we get consent, etc. But from there on, it's proven to be very reliable. We rarely get changes unless they're going on vacation or their circumstances have changed, etc.
We should clarify, they get a text message, and then if they want to know more, there's a link they can click, which
Yeah.
takes them to a landing page. They don't need a password. The landing page is only available through that link for a few days, so it's secure. It's not going to hang open, indefinitely, but then they can see the charts and things. So it's not an app. It's a progressive web app, you could call it, that doesn't require any sign-in, that takes a secure link. The trouble is these friends and family, it's a more distant connection and they're not going to install an app. So just they get a text. If they want to know more, they click and they get it.
Yeah, and I have to
Yeah, but
imagine an app is yet another thing that could break or maintain or like get
Yes,
uninstalled, new phones. Like there's just potential.
yes,
Whereas people's phone numbers are pretty durable. Like it's very,
it is.
I have to imagine
right.
extremely rare that you'd have a phone number
It
change.
is. And
Well, not to mention it dramatically reduces our security footprint, right? So
Yeah.
having an app increases our vulnerability substantially. We're dealing with a population that's already very high risk for scams. And so trying to reduce that security footprint was really important.
So I have a kind of related question to that. Because of the nature of the simplicity and you having less inputs, less complexity on the device, what do you do on your end to help make sure your devices are working as intended? Because I have to imagine there's a little more onus on it's a very simple device and these are important devices. People are relying on them. What
yes.
sort of monitoring do you do on your end to make sure everything's working as intended?
Yeah, it's been a progressive journey around that. And, it started with when we had the early days, and early days was not that long ago. It was, 8 months ago, when we only had a handful of product. We were very clear our initial product couldn't get over-the-air updates. And that was one of the other things that we had to unlock. So we're using a relatively low bandwidth cellular connection. We're using a modem that doesn't have a lot of throughput, and so making sure that we could provide firmware updates over the air was an unlock that only happened, Mark, I want to say in July or in August, which allowed us to then sort of deploy those sensors outside of the Portland metro area where we couldn't just swap out a sensor. But as we've gone out, we have found that there are nuances that are important. We are not centrally monitoring all of our sensors. It's intended to create a community around the people and integrate it into their existing relationships. But that early feedback model was really helpful to figure out what was working and what was not working. We recently, for example, we now have a dashboard that shows us which sensors are missing their reports on an hourly basis, and that has been a progression because even though they can be in an urban environment, but they could be in a shadow where a cell reception is spotty or etc. And so that allows us to monitor that there's a problematic connection in that, and that's helped us give them advice on where to place the sensor or if it'll work in their home, etc. And so, but the Node Hub app has been a really important diagnostic tool, and and we have diagnostic tools in our sensors as well. They're surprisingly effective. For example, we monitor every sensor when we place in the first couple of days to make sure that it's not getting triggered by something that doesn't look like human. And we've inevitably been, it's inevitably some sort of a balloon that causes it to go off. if they have a birthday, someone brings a balloon, it starts waving, and then suddenly the sensor is showing activity throughout. And so our ability to actually see, quote unquote, what the sensor is seeing has been really helpful from a diagnostic perspective. And what we see is how far is their activity from the sensor and how big is the energy return that we're getting. And that can be really helpful to narrow down what that looks like. But those are some of the really important tools. And as we start to apply machine learning for our data, we will be able to then start to use more custom notifications, and that is a whole nother exercise that we're only just getting started with that.
I'm curious about so you touched on this, like the support process and how this is obviously a very sort of privacy geared product. Do you ever get any pushback from customers who are like, well, thanks, but that's weird that you noticed that even? You know what I mean?
So our customers fall into a couple of different categories. So we have some customers who I literally remember this one person who was like, "You will be able to see what?" And they're like,
Yeah.
"I'm not getting this," right? And for those customers, we're like, "That's fine." There's no convincing them. But on the flip side, we also have our typical customer is adopting this as their first step in aging in place. So our competition tends to be do nothing, right? This is literally the first thing that they're doing to say, I want to continue to age where I am, whether that's in their home or whether it's in a community, but I want to try to stay in this current level of care as long as possible. And in that particular instance, it really depends on whether that older adult is making the decision or whether it's their child or a family member or friend that is making the decision. And what we have found is that when there's a trusted relationship, that conversation is easy because we're not monitoring and it's going to a trusted partner. But about a third of our customers will choose to only send a notification if there's an alert, right? So they're not sending that daily text. And that I've had many conversations where the thought of a device sending a text every day is just appalling to them. Like, why would it do that? So I think it takes all kinds, and that is the continuum of um, connections and relationships that we serve. And some of these have been counterintuitive. Like my relationship with my mom was our first beta tester. That makes perfect sense that I would get a text from her every day. I look for that text that tells me that she's up and around, and I'm like, that's great. She's got going. But others, their privacy is really important.
Right. As a quick aside, the results from our poll definitely skewed towards the exploring an idea / building a prototype audience. So I think you're all in the right place.
With a
Excellent.
healthy mix.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of everything. Uh, I want to dive into a couple of these technical topics a little bit. Just personally, I find it kind of fascinating. You talked about how your sensor can differentiate between pets and some other things as well. You want to talk a little bit about how that works? Because that kind of breaks I'm not familiar with how that works. I'm very
Sure. Let
curious.
me take that one. Yes, I'm unmuted. Yes. So we're using radar, not infrared, like the typical motion sensor is an infrared detector.
Yep.
This uses radar. It's millimeter wave radar, 24 gigahertz if you want to know the frequency. And it's so sensitive it can detect breathing. In other words, you can sit completely stock still and it will still know you're there just from the motion of breathing. Okay. And since it's a radar, it also knows how far away the target is and how strong the echo is. So the issue with pets came up literally with the first installation. Our first customer, not customer, prototype beta user, Joan, had a cat and a dog. And cats climb on counters, and she had it on a counter. Joan doesn't climb on the counter. So the first step was, can we gate the radar and say reject everything within 24 inches? Boom. No cat climbing on the counter can trigger it now. We don't pay attention to something within 24 inches. The next was the dog. That's easy because the dog's small and the human's larger. So you gate the energy. It has to be a stronger return. It gets a little challenging if you have a 4'10" older woman who owns two Great Danes, but that doesn't happen very often. And actually, the balloons, we've had ceiling fans trigger it. But the point is, the ceiling fan stays 12 feet from the sensor and just spins. So when you have a stripe of echoes at 12 feet away, day in, day out, that's a fan, and we can gate that out. So we have a patent on part of the process of doing that. That was kind of unique by using the radar rather than infrared technology.
Well, Marcus and TJ, you're bringing up a really important point, which is our sensors are going into a highly variable environment that we don't know what it's going into.
Yeah.
And we have to have the ability to effectively tune it to make sure that it is getting the right cellular signal, it's detecting sort of the right activity, it's not picking up sort of transient activity, etc. That was definitely a learning process. One of the things that we were very keen on was that we wanted to make sure that our products never sort of fall on the wrong side of the ick factor. And so we suggest that our sensors go into a living area rather than a sleeping area. So kitchens, living rooms are really good places where people frequent. And so we've learned to sort of hone those in along with the customer, and our pre-education has gotten better as well as our post support has gotten better thanks to Huang. So it's definitely a learning process.
Super
Yeah.
interesting.
One more technical one. Can you talk a little bit about temperature calibration and how that works? Because it's another one that's pretty important to get right. You're dealing with sensors and material that generate heat. So I'm just curious how you approach that too.
That was a that was a challenge. It seemed like that would be one of the simplest things. Um, all the chips have sensors. The cellular modem has a temperature sensor, but that's internal temperature. And our microcontroller has an internal temperature sensor, but none of that gives you the room temperature. So there's a temperature sensor on the board, but the trouble is the heat transfers. And so we had to go several iterations to get the sensor out to a corner of the board, not have copper, have an interruption of the copper ground plane so it doesn't conduct heat, and then literally put the sensor under a screw that screws into the case. So now the case is a heat sink for external temperature. Then calibrating it was fun because we don't have $1,000 laboratory oven. We're a low budget organization, but it turns out people incubate reptiles as a hobby. And so now for $50, you can get a red plastic reptile incubator with heat and cooling.
Surprisingly accurate reptile incubator.
Well, we didn't test it on reptiles, but we put a temperature, a better temperature sensor in it, and its gauge works. And so we were able to run a test and see how much offset do we need to reject the internal heat. And now it's working fine. So we do want to be able to trigger if their home's hot over 95 degrees, people need to know maybe the air conditioner's out, or if it's cold below 50 degrees, that really affects older people. So it's working fine, but that was an interesting challenge, and we did that reptile incubator validation.
I wonder if you could also talk just as a kind of extension of that. You mentioned early on using a 3D printer heavily. Like what sort of
Just early on.
Yeah.
All of our products are 3D printed. The cases are 3D printed.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I know one struggle that we hear a lot from people is they build their prototype, they just buy one of our starter kits, they get it working, but then the challenge of going from that to actually something like a PCB I make and an actual enclosure I make and something that I can ship, the journey there is kind of hard. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about some of the struggles you went through, or some of the processes you put in place.
You want that, Kabir, or you want Huang to talk about?
I think it's all three-way discussion, Mark. So Huang 3D prints the cases in her home, and she's got a little production shop in her basement where we're making, and our volumes have been, we're able to make inventory, build volume, and then and in a way that makes sense for us. But I think the key for us have been, the unlock for us has been the ability to iterate our products as we are learning about what our customers are doing, and to do that in a way that is much more cost efficient. All of the credit of that goes to Mark because of his both ingenuity of design, but also his ability to iterate very quickly and take in sort of customer feedback and channel that to a solution. We've had a number of instances where when it works fine in a lab setting, and then when we've taken it out into the field, usually it's me, it will break. And that's a good thing, right? Like that's part of the reason why I'm out in the field, and I tend to channel my inner customer, and make sure that I'm sort of trying to find all the ways that things can go sideways. But inevitably we can find the right solution. And our 3D printer has been a very robust solution for us, to the point where we're like, we don't necessarily need to go to tools. Maybe we just deploy more 3D printing, just because it is still low volume, but it's still iterating, and we'd rather have that flexibility and not have to have the cost of molds and the production run that we need, right? The biggest asset for us from a working capital perspective has been, we want to build on demand rather than build in advance. And so maintaining control of that has been just really valuable. And it's really been an unlock for us to be able to use services that allow us to do it that way.
Yeah, I think our next big question will be, at what scale do we need to switch from having 10 3D printers to actually going to molding? And so when is that stage, and what is that value? That'll be our next big question.
Yeah.
Interesting. I actually have a follow-up from an earlier topic that you brought up, Kabir. I think it was in your slides. Actually, Mark touched on it as well, but the Wi-Fi versus cellular. And I promise this is not a leading question for Blues. But my question, I mean, obviously you framed the dilemma really well, and you went the cellular route. However, we all know that cellular connectivity is powerful, but real world coverage is never remotely perfect. Um, I'm curious how you design the product, or what changes you had to make to kind of handle poor connectivity or intermittent connectivity.
Maybe I should take that one.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted question. Mark,
Yeah.
go for it. You start.
So the first point is, took pains to not compromise the antenna. The antenna, we use one of the recommended antennas. It's against the side of the case. The PCB, the ground plane is cleared near it so it doesn't detune it. And the antenna is vertical, so you get the optimum omnidirectional pattern, not horizontal where you're going to have nulls. When I was a double E, I was an antenna engineer, so that's a bit of background.
That was obvious from your answer. You didn't have to say that.
Okay, but what we found is interesting. The Blues Notecard will cache, if it can't get through on cellular, it caches that note and it tries again the next hour when we try to send something. And that actually fooled us for a while.
Tripped us up. Yep.
We'd see every hour, well, we're getting a report every hour, everything's beautiful, but it had sent out an alert saying, hey, there was no activity because there was a delay. So we had to add to our routine when NoteHub routes it to our servers, we have to timestamp that and find out if there was a delay. So what will happen is you'll get 6 notes in a row. If the cell connection was down for 6 hours and then it gets through, you get 6 notes in a row. So now our servers pick that up and chart it. So we get a report every day saying, even though everything looks good, here are cellular delays. So this is a connection that could be a problem. So we know about the borderline ones. The bars of signal strength doesn't help us at all. We found that not to be helpful, but knowing that there's intermittent delays helps a lot, and we can be aware of that and act on it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I could imagine like the connectivity information, like the bars you're mentioning, is only helpful when you can move it 100 feet or further. But when you're in a house, it's like, well, maybe it's not in the basement, it's upstairs. But yeah, that's interesting.
We've added a process test where we check sort of the address to the cell tower location, especially if we're deploying it in a sketchy area, that poor cell reception. And that's not a perfect solution, but it does give us an early read on whether this is going to be problematic or not. But it can also offer guidance on placement versus in the home, and orientation, and that can help. The other piece of it is, even though most of our sensors plug in directly, we do have the option of using a cable, and sometimes that cable can be helpful in increasing the ability to serve and then to connect in a better than sort of plugging in directly. So that we have a couple of those tricks to try as well.
That lets us put the sensor on a countertop, which
Yeah.
is going to be better from an antenna standpoint than plugged into a wall socket where there may be cables running through the wall. Overall, we have maybe 2 or 3% of the sensors that have connectivity challenges, which is really pretty good, considering this is going, this isn't New York. These are going into places where older people live. It may be a little bit out in the country, a little bit farther from the city. So I think we're doing well with just that small percentage of challenge.
I say this all the time, Rob and TJ, that three people should not have the ability theoretically should not have the ability to use a complex technology like cellular and text to connect disparate devices. But here we are.
Well, we're standing on the
shame
shoulders of giants.
No question, right? But that's kind of my point.
Yeah. Without getting too far in the weeds, I'm curious, off the top of your head, do you know which note card you're using?
The
Yes.
WBNAN.
Okay, good. I was going to say, for people out there who got started with our narrowband note cards that start with NB, we've noticed more connectivity issues with those, and we're actually actively kind of pushing people towards our midband or wideband ones that support Cat 1 Biz or Cat 1. So
We tried one of the narrow band and it didn't work out, and so we didn't use it anymore. But I think we're on the midband. We order the midband ones now. Don't
We're on the Cat Biz.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yep.
We had a question that came in from here in the Q&A. Do you see scaling to assisted and independent living facilities?
We are. We're currently in pilots right now with assistive and independent living communities. And one of the things that they really like is the fact that it isn't creating infrastructure costs for them, right? So it doesn't require specialized Wi-Fi, or the devices don't need to be separately connected into their systems. They can scale as much as they want or as little as they want, depending on sort of who they are. But historically, independent living and assisted living communities have been technology shy because they've been burned a bunch in the past.
Yeah.
And so we've done that inherently. We've taken it slow. So if 2025 for Hello Every Day was making sure that we proved out the technology and learned sort of different models that our customers employ, both organizations and individuals. And 2026 is figuring out what those channels are, and independent living and assisted living communities are definitely an important part of that. I also feel like we haven't quite hit our final form yet, right? So we're still learning with our customers, and really honing in on sort of what creates that urgency to deploy technology at scale. And oftentimes that is, historically, if you look back over the last 20 years, fall detection has been the be-all, end-all of everything related to technology, especially if you were in a community. And don't get me wrong, fall detection is important, but it's fundamentally flawed. It relies oftentimes on the user pressing a button or wearing something that detects it, etc., or relies on very complex cameras, and even then the error rate is relatively high. I think there has been more of a movement that housing older adults is not as important as making sure that they're enriched and they're thriving. And I think that's the journey that we really shine in, right? And creating that community around them, and whether that community is the people next door or if their community is hundreds of miles away, I think that's the key. And so that's really how we see, for example, that Hello Tunes play a really important role, both for their enrichment, but also to keep them safe and connected, and play that instrumental liaison between sort of caregiver well-being partner and the person that's aging.
Quick time check. We have about 15 minutes here. I want to make sure I have a lot of technically oriented questions. I'm going to try and avoid some of those because I want to hit on one question. I noticed you are direct to consumer through Amazon, correct? Like, I'm curious about that, like, sort of your go-to-market process. Like, what led you to Amazon?
It was an experiment, and frankly, it hasn't been a great experiment. Partly because we can't really do the advertising in order to make that a real channel, right? Our product is differentiated, and that also means that it's not always intuitive. Um, and so it was an experiment that we thought would be more successful than it really is. But what we've also realized is that when you are an older adult or a caregiver for an older adult, you're often in a point in time where your emotional and cognitive abilities to process whether technology is right for you is very limited just because you're in a high stress environment, right? And so that intermediary, whether that's an occupational therapist, whether that's the resident liaison director, whether that's the community itself, whether that's your physician or the nonprofit that vets these, they play a really outsized role in influencing your decisions. And so in 2026, it's really been around how do we connect with those individuals that help influence those decisions. And also, how do we do that at scale? So, how do we work with organizations that are going to buy tens of units rather than an individual sale until we become that standard of care? And so, that's proving to be a better strategy for us, at least until we sort of become, well known.
Yeah, it's hard to compete with some big box budgets for
Yeah.
marketing in particular. So how do you get to the SEO, top of the SEO? How do you get social media hits? And so those were the things that we played out with at really small scales, but we just found that it's just hard to compete with those big budgets in
It's
this
not
field.
unusual for a customer acquisition cost to be not just tens of dollars, but over $100 for a direct-to-consumer journey like ours, right? And so that becomes highly unsustainable when you want to keep your product costs as low as possible to encourage adoption. Um, so yeah, jury's still out on that one.
Yeah, I gotta imagine marketing can be a little bit challenging too, because you're almost creating a new category. I mean,
We
it's
are.
it's still right. It's if people might don't organically think to look for your product per
No,
se, they get to it through indirect means. So I imagine that has to be a huge challenge for just finding customers. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and for three groups of engineers to do
yeah,
yeah,
marketing.
yeah, yes,
right.
Uh,
But money will solve a lot of those issues. It can solve a lot of issues, right?
yeah,
What we have been weary of is having a lot of capital can also skew and it can buy initial product market fit, but it's not real product market fit. It's not really pull. And we really want that to create that pull before we throw a lot of money at it. I have to say that Mark and Huang have shown remarkable creativity in the scarcity when because resources are scarce, right? Our ability to get to this point and be well past generating revenue and not getting laughed out of the room when we're talking to large communities, when we're talking to large organizations that are putting their um, not just their brand at risk when they're taking a flyer on a small company like ours, but also sort of inherent liability associated with it. It's been gratifying to see that it resonates as well as it does.
Fascinating. Um, and a separate thread here. One question that we get from customers a lot is they're confused about the device certification process when adding some kind of radio to their product. Did you have to go through one? And if so, what was that like?
Well, why don't you take that?
For our first initial product, we did do FCC certification. We worked with an FCC company. Uh, there was several iterations. Like one of the hassles or issues that we came upon was just the power charger we used had some ambient noise, and so we had to switch out for that. But other than that, it was within the budget, something that we could do early. But we do know that at least starting out, we didn't have to do it immediately. I think you can do a handful of product to market before you take that FCC cert. And so you're hedging your bets on where that is.
I think one of the important things as well is to have the right advisor. And fortunately, we had several. It's an art, not a science, right? And I think one of the questions that we had to grapple with is, what are we certifying? Are we certifying when it's operational? Are we certifying just ambient noise, etc.? And what are the standards around that? And it was, I think having answers to some of those questions were really important, so we could specifically ask for what tests to ask for.
We were fortunate that the modules we used, the note card is FCC certified, and the microcontroller module we used was FCC certified. So we didn't have to undergo intentional radiator certification of a new transmitter. That's why we went with Blues and didn't try to design our own chip down design. So they only had to test for emissions that other than those from the intentional radiators that are pre-certified. I'm not describing it well, but basically it was the unintentional radiator certification. We had a glitch because of the power. You wouldn't expect the charger, the generic USB charger, to get another one and retest.
Even though it said FCC on it.
Oh yeah, it says FCC.
Well, and we did also have to switch out our radar module because the one that we were initially using did not come with an FCC cert. But those are sometimes hard to track as well I think from our perspective, one of the benefits that we have is we are using components that are typically off the shelf. But that can be a disadvantage as well, especially at our scale, right? We're market takers. We're not we can't make markets. So we have to rely on sort of what's available out there, and sort of integrate it accordingly. And that's the case for most small companies when they're getting started.
Maybe as one last question, just because I saw one last one came in here through Q&A. When an alert or concern is triggered, what typically next happens inside the family, and where does that process tend to break down?
Yeah, it's a great question. It can depend on what the alert is and what the family dynamic is. And so a lot of times it can be, there was so let me back up for a second. So we've had a couple of saves that we know of where people have gotten an alert that said that their person was not active, and it's now 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. They're like, what do you mean they're not active? They've gone and checked and they found that they were incapacitated. That's what we want to see happen. In the event where it's the reverse, where they're like, oh, my mom is traveling, I shouldn't be seeing any activity, and I'm still seeing activity. That's when we've noticed that it's a mylar balloon, or it was something that was getting triggered that we otherwise would not have noticed. And so for most customers, that the text that they get is usually sufficient to say everything's okay. It's when they're dealing with an acute or a chronic condition, that's when they tend to click into the dashboard and really look at the data. And that acute or chronic condition can be anything. It could be, hey, they're dealing with cognitive impairment, so they would just want to know that they're doing okay and what their pattern looks like, etc. And so we typically suggest that a person that's buying the sensor have at least one emergency contact. But there are customers that have 3, 4, or 5, and they choose to put the neighbor on, and the neighbor is only going to be on to get an emergency alert, whereas their kids are going to get sort of their access to the dashboard, etc. And so, or if they press the call button, it goes to the neighbor versus to somebody else. We had one customer whose dad lived in in independent living, and he was like, he wanted the device with the button because he's like, I know my son's going to get here faster than if I press the button that they've given me at the community, just because it takes them a while to get here, right? Like I know my son will get here faster. So it just depends on sort of the relationship that they have. We don't prescribe as a company what should happen. We give them the options that they have, and it usually fits within sort of their individual family or non-family settings, and how they choose to use it.
Yeah, and to be
Actually,
clear, so we don't utilize emergency services. We don't call 911 or the firefighters, but we're just the catalyst to facilitate that type of escalation pathway discussion.
And that's very intentional. I think research has shown, and if you've been in the space long enough, a lot of times a hospital visit can be a net negative for the person, especially if it's medication related, it's related to sort of a chronic condition, etc. And so for a lot of our customers, a large majority of their customers, they want the control of notifying somebody that they know that has the knowledge of their conditions rather than it just being an EMS call. The last thing they want is for their doors to be broken down, etc. Right? So this is another way to ensure that they have that control.
I do have one final question. Actually, I have like 7 or 8 more, but I'm going to kind of limit myself to one. Looking back, uh, is there any part of your journey that you went through that you would maybe like in hindsight, like what would you tell another company to do earlier in the process to avoid a problem? Is there anything that really stands out for you? Like what is your number one tip, I suppose?
Oh gosh, I think for me personally, it's been find the right team. Right, this company doesn't exist, but without the three of us doing what we do, and there's very little overlap in what we do. But it doesn't exist without sort of having all of the different skill sets that we bring to it. I think that's been honed in me over and over again, and so that the team is everything. Uh, Finding the right dynamic, finding the right skill sets, finding the right risk appetite and shared risk appetite. Those are all super important. Um, I think the second one for me is like the customer decides, right? The customer validation and whether it resonates with them or it doesn't resonate with them, that is everything. And we can pretend to know what they want and develop stuff, but until they actually use it and they actually pull and ask for it, it doesn't really matter. And so we have tried to keep that journey as short as possible, even if it feels embarrassing in the beginning. And I think that embarrassment has led us to sort of be very open that this is, we're testing out these features, and we test it out with sort of more friendly customers, but that has been invaluable, that feedback loop and maintain that feedback loop and connection. So if you call customer support, you're typically going to get me. And that's by design, because I want to talk to customers, because otherwise that's my feedback loop to Huang and Mark, and to their credit, they're very, very receptive to that information.
I
Great.
think for me, it's the marketing strategy and just how much I've learned within this landscape and how much I wish I had known before, sort of delving into spending money on Google ads, spending money on YouTube ads, spending money on Instagram, Facebook. Like, how would I have optimized it? And so, um, I don't know what I would have done differently, but somehow that could have been done differently.
Mark, what's your valuable tip?
My tip is, so in terms of near-death experiences for the company or the product, the near-death experience was before I met Kabir, and it was just me, and I had to make the decision to let other people in on this thing that I'd been playing with, and it's way more comfortable not to for engineers and introverts, but I realized it wasn't ever going to go beyond 10 with just me, and it's time to take a chance. And so I think the take it. Don't be afraid to take a chance, or be afraid and take a chance into the unknown, because that's going to happen over and over in your journey.
I love it.
Rob, I'm going to cheat and I got one more, right? I know we all have this illusion. I'm going to use that word intentionally, that AI is going to solve everything. We've had some very clear examples where AI has been a huge beneficiary for us. Don't get us wrong. We are here, we're doing what we're doing because we are able to learn things using AI that we otherwise wouldn't have any way of learning otherwise. But it's also led us really wrong in several instances that it's taken us months to figure out how to undo, right? Whether it's whether using AI to code and they're coding it wrong, whether it's using it for how to navigate a specific instance of copyright law, etc. It's the trust but verify is a really important component, and having the wherewithal to question each other and say, does this actually make sense, or there's something wrong, becomes really powerful. We often sit in the room together and we're like, why are the three of us only doing this in isolation? We had this exact example happen on Monday. But we realized that we've learned enough that the three of us can often solve that. If we bounce it off each other enough, we will be able to unpack it enough that we can ask like actual logical questions. So that's been a really important data point as well.
Fantastic. With that, I think we are at time. Again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, everybody from Hello Everyday. Be sure to visit them at hello-everyday.com. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so
Awesome.
much.
Thanks,
This
Rob.
was
Thanks,
awesome.